5 true stories that will haunt you tonight. Chunk 1. The night was relentless. Rain hammered the streets with a rhythm that seemed almost alive, drumming against windows, sliding down rooftops, and pooling in the cracks of the sidewalks. Thunder rolled across the city, shaking the walls of buildings like some unseen giant walking past. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of wet asphalt and ozone, and it carried with it the unsettling promise that the night held more than just darkness. I had just returned from a long day, craving nothing more than quiet, but the night had its own plans. The first story begins quietly, almost innocuously, with the kind of text message that freezes the blood. My phone buzzed softly on the coffee table. I picked it up, expecting a notification from a friend. But this was different. The number was unfamiliar. I see you. A laugh, shaky and uneasy, escaped my lips. Surely some prank. But deep down, I knew better. Whoever or whatever was on the other end of that message wasn't joking. The chill crawling up my spine said as much. Story 1. The Man in the Window. I had recently moved into an old apartment building downtown. The kind of place where the floorboards groaned beneath every step, and the narrow hallways seemed to swallow sound whole. The first night was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the ears and makes a person imagine shapes in every shadow. On the second night, I was in the living room, curled up with a book, when I noticed movement in the reflection of the window. A shadowy figure stood outside, staring at me. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, perhaps one of the few people left in the building, but the place was nearly empty. I froze, my eyes locked on the figure. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the outline of a man, tall and still, his head tilted slightly, as if studying me. The rain drenched his clothes, clinging to him like a second skin, but he made no move to step inside. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but the figure was gone the instant I looked away. My heart raced. I told myself it was a trick of the reflection, shadows distorted by the flickering light. The next morning, I checked the security footage. My blood ran cold. There he was, standing outside my window, smiling faintly, watching me for hours. The building was nearly empty, yet the footage showed him waiting, unmoving, almost patient, as if he knew I would see him eventually. Story 2. The Forgotten Room. This second story takes place in a derelict hotel on the outskirts of town, abandoned for decades. Urban explorers whispered rumors about the place. People had vanished there, guests, workers, anyone who dared enter after midnight. My friend worked nearby and convinced me to join him one night. Curiosity and perhaps foolishness got the better of me. We snuck inside, flashlights slicing through the dense darkness. Dust floated like tiny ghosts in the beams of light. The silence pressed against our eardrums as if the building itself were listening, waiting for us to make a mistake. Then we saw it, a door we hadn't noticed before, hidden behind the main staircase. The wood was ancient, warped with age. A rusty key turned in the lock, though it seemed as if no one had touched it in years. Inside, was a room that seemed normal at first glance. Empty, cold, yet something about it pressed against my senses. The moment we stepped in, the air changed. It thickened, became heavier, and the shadows seemed to stretch along the walls in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. The flashlights flickered, struggling against the darkness. Shadows shifted along the corners, as though something unseen was moving just beyond the edge of the light. A faint draft whispered past our necks, though the boarded-up windows didn't allow for wind. We fled, hearts hammering, never daring to look back. But even days later, reports came of strange noises in the building. Footsteps in empty hallways, doors opening on their own, whispers that lingered in the air. And though the door to the forgotten room remained locked, the memory of that oppressive darkness stayed with us, heavier than any physical weight could be.
5 true stories that will haunt you tonight. Chunk 2. The city had fallen into an uneasy quiet. Even after the storm, a heavy tension hung in the air, like the night itself was holding its breath. Shadows lingered longer than they should, stretching and twisting as if alive. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of a streetlight, buzzing faintly as if whispering secrets to anyone brave or foolish enough to listen. Story 3. The Voice at the End of the Hall. It happened during a late-night shift at an office building, long after everyone had left. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, buzzing softly, filling the empty hallways with a low hum. I was alone, the only sound my own footsteps echoing in the silence. Then I heard it, a voice, soft and pleading, carrying across the polished floors. "Help me." I froze. My rational mind told me it was the wind, but the tone, the desperation in the voice suggested otherwise. It was deliberate, drawn out, impossible to ignore. Step by step, I followed it, the sound growing clearer, more insistent. At the end of the hallway, the light above me flickered violently, plunging the corridor into darkness for a brief moment. When the light returned, there was nothing. Only my reflection in a glass door, and a faint, cold mist curling along the floor as though something had passed. I stepped closer, but the mist recoiled, forming shapes that reminded me of figures. Tall, thin, leaning in impossible angles, watching. My heart pounded in my chest. I backed away, only to hear a soft, almost inaudible whisper. "You shouldn't be here." The air thickened, pressing against me as though I were trapped in a bubble of cold fear. I ran, every instinct screaming to escape, but the echo of that voice stayed with me, lingering long after I had left the building. Story 4. The Hiker's Nightmare. A friend of mine loved hiking in the remote forests just outside the city. One weekend he set out alone, armed with only a backpack and a camera. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, sinister shadows between the trees. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to transform. Every branch and leaf seemed alive, moving in ways that defied the wind. He heard footsteps behind him, slow, deliberate, matching his pace exactly. Each step quickened his pulse, but whenever he turned, there was nothing, just the trees swaying under the evening breeze. The shadows grew longer, denser, curling into shapes that resembled figures. Then, suddenly, he saw it, a tall silhouette standing just ahead of him on the path. Its form was thin, impossibly elongated, and its head tilted unnaturally. It didn't move as he approached, it simply waited. He tried to run, but the path seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting, leading him deeper into the forest. The figure remained, always ahead, never closer, yet impossible to escape.
Hours seemed to pass before he stumbled onto the main trail, bathed in the faint light of dawn. Looking back, he could see two glowing eyes in the shadows, watching silently from the dense undergrowth. He never returned to that forest. The night carried on, each story heavier than the last. The rain had stopped, but a sense of lingering dread had settled. Like the forest, the office, the abandoned places themselves were watching. Each shadow, each creak of a floorboard, each whispering wind hinted at things unseen, waiting for the next moment of weakness. 5 true stories that will haunt you tonight. The night had settled into a different kind of darkness, not the simple absence of light, but a presence that pressed against the walls, seeping into the very air. Even familiar places felt alien, as if unseen eyes followed every movement, and shadows weren't merely shadows, they were watching. Story 5. The Summer House. It was meant to be a simple weekend getaway. A family rented a summer house by a quiet lake, the kind that looked serene in photographs, all sunlight and gentle ripples. The first day was peaceful. Children played along the shoreline, laughter carried across the water, and the parents felt a rare sense of calm. But as night fell, the lake transformed. The moonlight reflected perfectly across its surface, masking something beneath, something unseen. Doors began to creak despite the absence of wind. Lights flickered faintly, and the softest of whispers floated across the water, almost too quiet to catch. One by one, family members noticed shadows where none should have been. Shapes darted along the walls, behind furniture, just beyond the corners of vision. Objects moved slightly, not enough to be immediately obvious, but enough to make hearts race. The air grew cold, heavy, filled with an oppressive tension. By midnight, sleep was impossible. The family gathered in the living room, staring out at the lake. A single footprint appeared on the dock. No one had walked there. It was perfect and undisturbed, except for that one mark, darkened by the damp wood, as if someone or something had been standing there, waiting. Story 6. The Silent Passenger. A taxi driver, a friend of mine, shared a story that still haunts him. Late one night, he picked up a passenger on a desolate stretch of road. The man was tall, silent, and oddly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead, hands resting calmly on his knees. As the car rolled through empty streets, a strange coldness filled the interior. Windows fogged despite the heater being on. My friend asked the man for a destination. The man only shook his head, saying nothing. Minutes passed, then the passenger vanished. The seatbelt clicked as if someone had unbuckled it, but the seat was empty. The streetlights flickered in perfect timing, casting shadows that stretched and recoiled unnaturally. My friend stopped the car. Outside, on the edge of the street, a figure stood, matching the speed of the vehicle perfectly, walking alongside it, never moving closer, never retreating. When he reached the supposed destination, the figure was gone. No trace, no footprints, nothing except a lingering chill in the air, as if someone had exhaled into the night. The night deepened, shadows stretching across walls and windows, lingering in corners and doorways. The stories built upon each other, each one heavier than the last, as though fear itself was accumulating in the night, thickening the air. Even in daylight, the memory of those nights clung, like a shadow that refuses to leave.
5 true stories that will haunt you tonight. The night seemed endless, stretching into a darkness that was no longer simply the absence of light. Shadows grew deeper, corners of familiar rooms seemed sharper,
and every creak of the floorboards felt like a whisper, warning that someone or something was present. Story 7. The Attic. An old Victorian house sat quietly at the end of a cobblestone lane. It had been empty for decades, its history fading into rumor and half-forgotten tales. A group of friends, drawn by curiosity and a taste for adventure, decided to explore its attic one stormy evening. The staircase groaned under their weight, each step echoing through the hollow house. Dust hung in the air like tiny motes of ghostly light, disturbed by their movements. In the far corner, they discovered a small wooden chest, old and worn, its brass fittings tarnished by time. As they opened it, a sudden gust of wind blew through the attic, though the boarded-up windows should have prevented any air. Shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally along the walls. A low whisper brushed past them, soft and chilling. "Leave." Before anyone could react, the chest slammed shut with a force that shook the floor. The flashlights flickered, casting elongated shapes that moved independently of their holders. Terrified, they fled, stumbling down the stairs into the night. Even days later, neighbors reported strange occurrences in the house, footsteps in the attic, doors creaking open by themselves, faint voices murmuring unintelligible words. The chest remained locked, but the oppressive presence lingered, heavy and suffocating, as though it waited for someone brave or foolish enough to return. Story 8. The Forgotten Hospital Room. At the edge of town stood an abandoned hospital, its walls crumbling and windows shattered. Legends whispered that patients had vanished without a trace, some leaving behind only screams that seemed to echo eternally. A young man, eager to capture the eerie atmosphere, ventured inside with his camera. The corridors were damp, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. Broken gurneys and peeling paint hinted at long-forgotten pain and suffering. He stumbled upon a room that didn't appear on any maps of the hospital. Inside, the air was heavy, almost viscous, and every sound was magnified. In the corner, an old hospital bed lay beneath a tattered sheet. Suddenly, the sheet twitched. The movement was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Then, with a sudden jerk, it lifted. Nothing was there, but the bed creaked, slowly, as if someone invisible had just risen from it. The camera caught a pale face in the window's reflection, eyes wide, staring directly at him. He fled, heart pounding, leaving the building behind. But the memory of the room, the bed, and the face lingered, etched into his mind like a nightmare that refuses to end. By now, the night had become almost tangible, thick with tension and dread. The stories stacked upon each other, layering fear upon fear. The darkness wasn't merely around them, it was inside, creeping into thoughts, into every crevice of the mind.
By now, the night had reached a depth that felt alive, pressing against every surface, every shadow, every heartbeat. The air itself seemed heavy, as if anticipating the final revelations. The stories had built upon each other, each one heavier, darker, more insistent. Now the last two tales would leave marks that would not fade easily. Story 9. The Locked Cabin. A young couple sought solitude in a remote mountain cabin. The first evening was calm. The forest around them seemed peaceful, and the gentle sound of a nearby creek promised serenity. But as night fell, the serenity vanished. Strange noises echoed from the surrounding woods, scratching, rustling, and the occasional snap of a branch, each sound deliberate and unnervingly close. The man went outside, flashlight in hand, scanning the darkness. Nothing.
The forest seemed empty, yet oppressive. Returning inside, he locked the doors, hoping it was merely animals. Minutes later, a violent rattling shook the cabin. The door handle twisted as if forced by unseen hands. Windows shivered, and shadows seemed to stretch across walls, tall, thin, moving in impossible ways. By dawn, the cabin was empty. No signs of struggle, no evidence that anyone or anything had entered. Yet, in the fresh snow, a trail of footprints circled the cabin repeatedly, as if someone or something had paced all night, watching, waiting, ensuring the couple would never return. Story 10. The Mirror in the Attic. The final story began with inheritance. A young woman inherited an old house from her grandmother. While exploring the attic, she discovered an ornate mirror covered in dust and cobwebs. The moment she uncovered it, a chill swept through the attic. At first, her reflection seemed normal. Then subtle distortions appeared. Shadows moved behind her in the glass, shapes that did not exist in the room. She turned quickly, but the room was empty. Only the mirror betrayed the presence of something else. The figure appeared, tall, thin, silent, its face obscured in shadow. It moved closer with each blink, never leaving the glass, always watching. She fled, but the mirror remained. That night, no sleep came. Every creak of the old house, every draft seemed amplified, as if warning her the figure was near. By morning, the mirror had cracked, and in the jagged lines appeared words, faint but unmistakable. "I'm still here." Even after the mirror was removed, shadows lingered in corners, lights flickered inexplicably, and the feeling of unseen eyes watching refused to leave. The night ended, yet the stories persisted, like echoes in an abandoned hall. Each tale, whether a man in a window, a forest figure, a haunted cabin, or a silent mirror, carried the same message. The unknown never truly leaves, and some presences are patient, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known again. The storm had passed, the rain ceased, but fear had taken root. And for those who listened closely, late at night, even in the safety of their homes, the whispers of the past, the shadows of unseen things, and the memory of those 10 terrifying encounters would never fade. The darkness wasn't over. It had simply moved, waiting, watching, as it always does.
Subscribe.